Good morning, and thank you for joining us for today's Business Support Series. This is episode 14, Next Steps for Education. I'm Mike Neal, President and CEO of the Tulsa Regional Chamber, and we're delighted you join us today. This Chamber's Business Support Series offers insights on how your organization can effectively respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. There's an area where the Chamber could be of assistance to you or your business. Please simply let us know. Our topic today, our discussion, is about education. As you're all aware, the pandemic forced schools to close and introduce virtual learning to finish the school year. In the short term, this has left many parents, many employees who've had to juggle remote working, childcare, and at-home learning. And there are many questions about how and when school will return to normal. The long-term effects of this crisis are yet unknown. How it will affect children and our future workforce for years to come. But before we discuss these questions and issues with our speakers, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank our sponsors, Expert Ready, Lux Enterprise, Stride Bank, and Security Bank. And we're pleased to have with us the Tulsa Market President of Stride Bank, Mr. Adam Baker, to introduce our two featured speakers. Adam?
Thank you, Mike. It's an honor to join everyone today and introduce our speakers. We have Dr. Stacey Butterfield, who's Superintendent of Jenks Public Schools, where she oversees 12,300 students and 1,500 staff members. She began her teaching career as a first grade teacher at Jenks East Elementary and has served as superintendent since 2013. Carlisha Williams Bradley is Executive Director of ImpactTulsa. During her career, she has served in leadership roles as an educator, administrator, superintendent, and in nonprofits. At ImpactTulsa, she connects community members with data-driven solutions to improve education for all students. Carlisha also serves on the Oklahoma State Board of Education. Thank you both for joining us today. Will you please share with us your perspective on the pandemic's short and long-term effects on education, starting with Dr. Butterfield?
I'd be happy to, and I appreciate the opportunity to share, our story and experiences we're having in Jenks, as well as to highlight the work of educators from across, the Tulsa area and around Oklahoma. I think I would be remiss if I did not recognize, though, that none of us are working in isolation, and that, through the guidance and support from the State Department of Education and the State Board, we are making progress in addressing, the outcomes and the experiences of this pandemic together, and collaborating with our educator friends, our colleagues, not just within our own districts, but within other districts. So I share this to say we're not working in isolation, and we're grateful for the support. I think first and foremost, all of us are going to be flexible and adaptable. And no doubt this pandemic has been a disruption to routines of our young people of all ages, and the effects are going to be different from the effects on a first grader versus the effects of a middle school student to that senior in high school who has had their entire senior year disrupted. And depending upon which district they're in, they're still trying to figure out what does graduation look like, and what are those next steps going to look like, whether that is off to college or career tech opportunities or into the workforce. And so there's no doubt there are definite short-term disruptions, and we're trying to address those with our distance learning plans and focusing on the end of the school year. At the same time, our attention is transitioning to what does it look like long-term? What preparations do we need to make this summer to launch school in the fall? And then what does launching school, a new school year, look like for everyone? And when we talk about the long-term effects on education, we cannot be remiss in not acknowledge that there are going to be learning gaps. And at the same time, there are social emotional learning needs. It can't just be a focus on academics, but it's also a focus on the other needs that our students have. And we as educators are going to need to be prepared for that when we return to school in August. And, we see some things that are happening that I hope will remain in place come August and into the next school year. And then there are other pieces that certainly, being back connecting with students face to face is really important, and we're looking forward to that. But some of the opportunities that we've had for distance learning, these will stay with us. And perhaps, some of these initiatives are moving more quickly now than what they would have without the pandemic. So there are moments to be proud, and there are moments to recognize we want to do things differently moving forward.
Stacey, thank you. Carlisha.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. I want to echo the sentiments of Dr. Butterfield. Our educators, our superintendents, the State Department of Education has just done an incredible job pivoting at such a critical time, unprecedented time. When I think about the short and long-term effects, we've really seen and highlighted the utmost importance of the public education system, the foundational needs that our schools meet for our most vulnerable students, from meal services, the social emotional supports of having that face-to-face interaction and love and care in a school environment, the relationships that are held by our public education systems. We've just highlighted the importance of this institution and of our incredible teachers who are being flexible and managing their children at home while also still caring for the needs of many of our students across our city. And so when I think about what does this mean for what comes next, as school districts are juggling the many scenarios of what does reentry look like in a safe manner, whether that is the ability to stagger schedules and to ensure that it's a clean environment. I think that right now on the minds of systems leaders is, what is my plan A, B, C, D, to ensure that we're able to serve students. Also during this time, we've elevated inequities and gaps for our students. With distance learning being at the forefront right now, we have highlighted the fact that the digital divide is very real, and how we're able to get technology to students, connectivity to students. It is shown that there are disparate outcomes for many students within our county, within the city of Tulsa, that we must bridge that gap, and can see this as an opportunity to highlight the need, and also to see it as an opportunity to highlight how we shift instruction and how we can use technology moving forward in the future. I will echo the sentiments in knowing that once we hit the button to go back to school, it doesn't mean that the gaps aren't there. There's more work to be done. And even with the individualized supports that we're able to offer students, we'll also need resources flowing into the school buildings to pivot and to provide that in-depth support, and not negating the trauma that students may have endured in this time while the school building has been closed. Thinking about the relationships and the foundational needs that are met in the public school institution. It's not just about the academic rigor, but there's so much more that's provided inside those walls. And so honing in on the social emotional supports, the counseling supports, the mental health needs of our children during this time is going to be critical as we go back into the work environment, into our school environments, and really begin to serve students holistically.
Carlisha, thank you. I'm getting choked up here. Let me say to Stacey and Carlisha, thank you. Thank you both for joining us. Some states have announced additions and ambitious restarts for starting school as quickly as the summer. Could Oklahoma possibly start this summer, or would we be far better off to wait till the fall? What would you see as the pros and cons about the actual timing of the restarting of school?
Carlisha, would you like to take that as a state board member first?
I'll take a stab at it. I think that, honestly, when we weigh the pros and cons, we're right in phase one of reentry. And so it's really early to tell, right? And when we look at the White House's reopening plan, it says in phase one that all schools and organized youth activities that are currently closed should remain closed. And so once we are entering into phase two, I think that there's an opportunity for conversations about what does reentry mean in a safe way, thinking about the health and well-being of students, of staff, of teachers during this this time, and the lift that that's going to be on our school districts across the state to adhere to those guidelines. And whether that is social distancing or smaller class sizes, this is not something to be taken lightly. I think that a lot of intentionality would go into opening and ensuring that it is a safe environment. I know when I look at the news about other states that are moving towards that path, a lot of questions coming up from school districts about what does this mean with the resources that we have available to be able to adhere to the guidelines, supporting our students to have a great learning environment while also being able to ensure that everyone is healthy and safe. So I think that we are just at a place where we have a lot of unknowns. The pros would be obviously getting back in there and closing those learning gaps. The con would be going too early and risking the health of our students, staff, and teachers.
Thank you, Carlisha. Stacey?
Yes, we are, with summer school plans, those begin early in the springtime. And so while the plans may vary from district to district, currently most are looking at having to do summer school virtually because all of these plans are ever changing. And right now with the current reopening phase 1, 2, and 3, if things go well, we won't even get into phase 2 until the middle of May. And the unpredictability of what this reopening timeline looks like, we just went ahead and began making plans as if we need to plan on from a distance learning perspective. And so most programs will be virtually. We also are starting to look at, though, how can we get teachers in for professional development? Can some of this be virtual and via Zoom this summer? Can some of it maybe in later July? Can we be face-to-face with the intent that we would begin in August? I think there's a lot of conversations among the State Department personnel and school leaders about when is the right time to look at starting school in August. And there are some that are saying, perhaps we look at coming back a little bit earlier than normal in anticipation that there may be a second wave in the fall. So if we can get students and families back in and have teachers connecting with students and launching new learning and addressing some of the social emotional learning needs. And then if we should have to go back out or close school, then we would have at least been able to start establishing the beginning of the school year protocols and launching new learning. So that's still to be determined. I would say, most are hopeful that we can begin on schedule in August. I know there are some that have also talked about, if we can't begin face-to-face in August and it looks like pushing to closer to September would enable us to start face-to-face, then we would look at doing that too. So there are really no decisions being made philosophically for the fall. It's just a lot of discussion.
Do you envision, Stacey, to that point, Stacey and Carlisha, do you envision that ultimately that when a decision is made that all schools will start at the same time, or do you I'm assuming that systems have the flexibility, but would you anticipate that all start the week of August, whatever?
I would say right now, my fear is a greater desire being expressed for flexibility and for local control, local decisions, because teacher contracts look different from district to district. And so while there has definitely been some discussion about what could a start date, a similar start date for all look like, I would say we're hearing more response of the desire to have local control.
Okay. Carlisha?
I agree. I mean, even when we think about the school closures and setting that date of when the school year would end, it was really up to the local districts to decide, just going until a certain date, but wanting them to have the flexibility to do what they need and know is best for their students locally.
Sounds good. Next question. Next question is really, does this school closure and pandemic qualify for consideration as an adverse childhood experience? And what long-term effects should parents and really the community be concerned with resulting from this pandemic?
So, I think when we look at adverse childhood experiences, we first have to understand, that how that's defined. And that's defined as potentially traumatic events that occur in a student's childhood. And so, I think, Mike, definitely that depending upon each individual child's experiences during this pandemic, it could indeed be an adverse childhood experience. We have parents losing jobs. We have parents that don't know how they're going to put food on the table. We have, families, as Ms. Williams-Bradley said, the digital divide, the equitable access does not exist across this state. And so, yes, I think we need as educators to expect that the social, emotional learning needs may look different in the fall, and not just for our students, but for our staff members too. Yes, we may have teachers returning to jobs, but we have no idea of knowing what their own personal experiences have been through this pandemic with their own spouse or their own parents or their own other family members. And so we have, as educational leaders, have to be ready to meet the needs of our students and their families, but also our employees.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Butterfield.
Yeah, I think about, adverse childhood experiences and the categories of abuse, neglect, household dysfunction. And what we've seen a lot at ImpactTulsa, we've been hosting weekly nonprofit school district calls, and our partners have been asking a lot of questions as we've gone deeper into quarantine about domestic violence supports. And so we hadn't heard as much about child abuse reports. However, 20% of child abuse reports are done at the school building, right? And so we think about students not being able to be inside of a school building and getting those supports. What does that look like for some of our most vulnerable students when they're returning? Stress in the household from parents, economic hardships that are happening during this time. The dysfunction in homes is at an alarmingly high rate, as we've even seen from domestic violence cases during this time, and what students may be exposed to at home. And so I do think that students may come back to school with a higher rate of adverse childhood experiences. And as we prioritize instruction returning, those social emotional supports are going to be critical just for students to show up and even be ready to learn, to understand how we support them mentally and emotionally as well.
Thank you, Ms. Williams-Bradley. Next question is, we have seen students and parents and teachers become familiar with remote learning, such as we've all become familiar with remote meetings and virtual meetings. But for all the problems that the pandemic has caused, what new opportunities are available with this new technology? Maybe that once students return to the classroom, that they and your faculty members and others will be able to benefit from as a result of utilization of new technology.
I look forward to some of this rapid infusion of technology remaining in place, both for student learning, but then also connecting with families and parents. Our students with special needs, those individual education plan IEP meetings, it's not always easy for us to get parents in the building to actually meet with staff members. And we've been able to connect with families and hold IEP meetings via Zoom and Google Meets. And so for those types of meetings, and then also just parent conferences, I'm excited about what this platform may do for us in connecting with families around the state. And I think while there will be more online opportunities that remain in place for secondary students, I think we have to remember that this is not necessarily the best instructional delivery model for all ages. A former elementary teacher, I'm sorry, I cannot help myself. We still need face-to-face connection. And another piece that many of us have talked about in our schools around the state is, perhaps there are no more weather days. Perhaps, we hit the button and we have remote distance learning on weather days. So I think there are pieces that will remain in place that are very exciting. And then there are other aspects. We are ready to return face-to-face and working with our young people.
Thank you, Stacey. Carlisha?
I definitely think, there's such an opportunity to use this moment while we're in a space of crisis to also reinvent. Transcend Education put out an article, and it was talking about this window of time that we have to respond, to recover, and then to also reinvent. And if we miss this window to think about what can we take with us from this time to reimagine public education, supports, and access, then we're missing out on the gift that has come with the curse of closure, right? So I do applaud Dr. Butterfield's efforts in talking about this. This is a way that we can connect with parents in a more meaningful way to sustain relationships. Even for our work at ImpactTulsa, it's allowed for us to bring experts from across the country to quickly share those best practices with school leaders and teachers, a way to really build this cross-sector collaboration, not just in our own backyard right here in Tulsa, but bringing in others who are doing the work across the country. And I think about even, webinars that have popped up during this time for our development and ways that we're choosing to reach out to individuals and really see forth this work of blending and bringing us together through the power of technology. And I can see that for students. Again, what does it mean to close the gaps of the digital divide when we think about remote learning and really truly providing access to all students? Is this an opportunity to reimagine that internet access is really a utility? I mean, even when we think about how this time is transforming the workforce and knowing that jobs are able to be done at home, what does it mean for each family to have internet access within their home, and closing that technology gap for all students so that when we do have a weather day and we press that button, that all kids have access to the same learning at the same time.
Carlisha, to that point, how do you assess how well we're doing or how well we've done? I guess technically it's how we're doing now, how well we're doing at addressing that digital divide and trying to get that internet access, get that technology into the hands of students who have traditionally never been able to have that. How do you grade us at this point today?
Yeah, I think that there were, several districts that went through many efforts to ensure that students had access, from distributing hotspots to all of the iPads, the technology that was within the school building. We also have partners like Cox Communication with the Cox to Compete to allow for there to be low cost internet in the homes of families who needed the support. But there were also, barriers that were in place to get access. No one expected the influx of need at this time. And at ImpactTulsa, we have a child equity index that allows for us to look at many layers of systemic barriers that are impacting student success. And one of those maps is actually of internet access and seeing where are students under the age of 18, where do they have access to technology and connectivity across our city of Tulsa. And we can see in pockets that are lower socioeconomic, more vulnerable populations, there are disparate outcomes of who has access to technology during this time. Many districts, even like Tulsa Public Schools, put out their school buses with hours of time blocks where the Wi-Fi is streaming, ensuring that students had access in some way. But as we think long-term, as we think about what is possible for our city, I know that the city of Tulsa and ImpactTulsa and several of the districts, including Dr. Butterfield, are forming a task force to talk about what does closing this digital divide look like in the city of Tulsa, especially as we may find ourselves at a time to have to go back to distance learning and ensuring that we're able to provide that access.
Thank you, Carlisha. Stacey, my question to you is slightly different. And that is, how do you assess how your team is doing? Adam talked about the number of employees that you have and the very significant size of the Jenks Public School District. How are they doing? How's the mental psyche of your teachers, your faculty, your principals, your administrators? How are they surviving this pandemic, and how are they connecting to these students?
Well, it is certainly a heavy lift. Our educators they get into education because they care about young people. And so we are taking stock of, and we talk about it from a leadership perspective. This isn't just about asking our teachers to make connections with families and meet their needs, but then also what are we doing to meet our employee needs? And, and For example, we just sent out a newsletter this week, a health and wellness newsletter for all of our employees, and looking at giving them tips and resources of taking care of themselves, because of the idea, the research-based idea that if we're not taking care of ourselves, we can't take care of others. And it starts with us first. And then as far as how are we assessing how we're doing, you know, our principals are keeping a pulse on how often our teachers are connecting with those families. And then we're tracking also which families are we not able to connect with, which students are we not able to connect with. And then there is a process that we have for circling back and connecting with, trying to make other efforts. If the teacher's not able to, can the counselors make a connection? If they're not able to, can principals make a connection? It is not enough just to say, well, I had, you know, 20 of my 26 students get on the Google Meet and then move on. That's not acceptable. So we're doing that. I also, Mike, want to go back to what you were at, the two of you were speaking about accessibility and connectivity. You know, of course, we're focused here on the Tulsa area, but at a statewide level, it is our hope that some of the state stimulus dollars can be dedicated to this connectivity issue, because there may be people in the Tulsa area that are not aware that there are areas of our state that do not have internet access still, and, you know, out in the more the rural areas. And so it is certainly our hope that some stimulus dollars can be dedicated to this issue. It's great, the resources that we have, the hotspots, the low cost access. It's still not enough though.
Thank you, Dr. Butterfield. Thank you, Ms. Williams-Bradley. Got just time for one question remaining, and I'll go to Adam Baker from Stride Bank for our final question to our panelists. Adam?
Thank you, Mike. I have two school-age children, so for the parents on the call, what's your best tip for helping children stay on track in their education through the pandemic?
Well, I will start by saying, do not try to do everything. Reading on a daily basis is important. And of course, that's going to look different for a 4-year-old or a middle school student or a high school student. But whether that is reading to your child or dedicating 20 to 30 minutes, depending upon the age, to truly reading, that is first and foremost. And then, you know, putting thoughts on paper, asking a student to reflect on what their week has been like. What are they looking forward to when we're able to get back out? But, you know, with those writing skills, that's a way to put thoughts on paper. And then simply getting outside. We know the research, vitamin D is important for all of us, but to get outside and take a walk and remember, we will do our best to get back on track with academic growth and gains. We will never make up all of this time, but we're in this together. And it's about making the most of this and giving each other grace.
I completely agree. You know, I think about, especially for parents who are working from home, you're trying to be a parent and a teacher and so many things. You're a parent first, and there are things that you can provide your child with that no one else can. And we talked a lot about the trauma and the social emotional care for students during this time, and children, they hear the news when it's on as well. And so thinking about what are opportunities to talk about building those character traits of empathy, of compassion, of how do we look at the world in a different way. Thinking about activities such as cooking and measuring, and that's a math lesson in and of itself. Giving yourself some grace in this process and engaging in the time that you have together, while knowing that this season will go back and they'll be back in school, and our educators are ready to wrap their arms around them and catch them up to speed. But right now, it's so important that you're their parent and that you love them in this season and let them know that they're cared for, so that we can be ready to meet those academic needs once they're back.
Thank you, Carlisha. Great answer there. As a parent with older children, one who recently graduated from college, another who graduates from college in 2 weeks and isn't going to get to walk across that stage. So it's been a challenge for all of us, but it's really been interesting, as you both referenced. We have a lot of employees who have young kids, and it's been really fun to watch them in meetings with us on Microsoft Teams and Zoom and other things, trying to handle the kids in the background and trying to be actively engaged in our meetings. And it's been fun. I volunteered to babysit several of them. None of them have taken us up on it yet, but we've offered to help them. So thank you for the support you're helping provide these young people. As everyone knows, the Tulsa Regional Chamber and all of our chambers, Jenks Chamber, Broken Arrow Chamber, all of our chambers in this region, their number one priority on the One Voice legislative agenda for the past decade or longer has been education, supporting education. And so the work that these two ladies are doing, helping lead in our city and our region, is so critically important. And I cannot thank Stacey and Carlisha enough. Adam, thank you as well for joining us today. Again, I'd like to thank our sponsors who are listed at the bottom of your screens: Expert Ready, Luxa Enterprises, Security Bank, and Stride Bank. To anyone who joined us a little bit late via webinar or on Facebook Live or by phone, a recording of this will be posted on our chamber website later today. So please feel free to direct anyone to come view the great dialogue we've had with Dr. Butterfield and Miss Carlisha Williams. We appreciate your work. Thank you so much. Our next business support series webinar will be next Tuesday, May the 5th at 11 a.m. It will be Economic Development Week, National Economic Development Week. So our chambers, economic development organizations across our state will be looking at what we can do to support economic development, certainly during this pandemic. We'll be fortunate here to have a new host in Bill Murphy, our chamber senior vice president of economic development. He'll discuss how COVID-19 has impacted regional economic development in all of our communities. You'll be fortunate to have with him Chelsea Lebo-Ferry, Director of Economic Development for the City of Owasso, and David Stewart, Chief Administrative Officer for the Mid-America Industrial Park in Pryor. They'll talk about what's happening in their respective areas and across our region. You can register for that webinar on tulsachamber.com/events. And again, please do not hesitate to reach out to me personally, to any member of our staff. Likewise, feel free to reach out to any of our chambers in this region who are here to support businesses and assist you in any form or fashion as we try to get out of this pandemic and begin the return to work process in a gradual fashion in the weeks and months to come. So thank you for joining us. Have a great day and a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much.